If you're stuck with your jiu-jitsu conditioning, let me show you how to develop an endless gas tank on the mat. Before jiu-jitsu has gone down the road that CrossFit went down, just throwing a random bunch of things into a circuit format, get the heart going, get sweating, and that's considered conditioning. However, there's a better approach and a more logical approach to conditioning that you can take to be able to see performance and transfer to your jiu-jitsu game rather than just making yourself more tired like you were already when you were rolling jiu-jitsu. Now, before we go into those details, first we need to break down some of the demands of jiu-jitsu. Now, there are some caveats to this, and I will touch on that after I run through this part, but from the research we currently have, which is very, very minimal, we have a 6-to-1 effort to pause ratio, so a work to rest. For every 6 blocks of work, there is 1 block of rest. So that translates roughly to around 117 seconds of work and 20 seconds of rest. And then we can break that work period down even further into an 8-to-1 low to high intensity ratio, around 30 seconds of low intensity work to 2 to 4 seconds of high intensity work. Now, regarding high intensity, that might be your scrambles, your shots, sweeps, etc. Low intensity work, your grips, going through different techniques, etc. Regarding VO2 max, we're looking at around 45 milliliters per kilo per minute, and this is well below judoka and wrestlers, so if we're comparing to other grappling arts. Now, obviously there are some caveats to this, as I mentioned in the beginning. These 2 papers were published in 2012 and 2015. They were done in simulated matches and obviously in gi. Now, we know that 2012 and 2015 jiu-jitsu is much different to today's jiu-jitsu. The meta is changing. A lot of it's more wrestling based, a lot more no-gi jiu-jitsu, more submission grappling. And those events are typically, from an observant point of view, much higher intensity because of the rule sets. The rule sets encourage more wrestling versus a typical gi, for example, IBJJF match. Now, the reason VO2 max might be lower in these individuals is jiu-jitsu is not a professional sport, at least not at this time. Now there are professionals, but in 2012, 2015, not really a professional sport. Judo and wrestling, both Olympic sports, these athletes are full-time within their government's national training program. Therefore, they have the consistent training. Jiu-jitsu athletes, they work full-time. They probably do jiu-jitsu on the side as a hobby, or even if they're competitive, they do jiu-jitsu but don't do much else off the mats. Hence why potentially a lower aerobic capacity in these jiu-jitsu athletes. Now, if we're going to compare this again to no-gi, potentially no-gi has more high intensity efforts. Maybe you don't have such a large effort to pause ratio, or if you do, you probably have more high intensity efforts within those low intensity efforts. So bear that in mind. We can't take too much from this other than, hey, the sport likely has a very high aerobic component and a very high anaerobic component, which all combat sports do and all sports that are mixed energy systems do. So before we get into how the conditioning fits into your week, I'm going to give you the philosophical breakdown of how conditioning could look within your training to maximize performance. Now, I touched on this a lot within the podcast. A lot of guests have also touched on this. It's the idea of a polarized approach to training and conditioning. Call it the funnel system. It could be anything, whatever you want to call it. But essentially, you're attacking the very high outputs and the very low outputs, and then jiu-jitsu takes care of most of the stuff in the middle. So if you're rolling a couple of times a week hard, doing positional sparring, that will typically take care of the stuff in the middle. When you're throwing random exercises together into a circuit just to get the heart rate up, to feel that burn, to sweat, you're just adding more stuff in here. And the problem with adding more stuff in here is, yes, you will become more conditioned and more quote unquote fit. However, at some point, gains are gonna stop and injuries and niggles start to pick up. You don't improve maximal outputs or maximal power, and you don't improve this very low intensity area, which is important for central and peripheral adaptations. Now, if you go back to my podcast I did, it was a solo one that was clearing the conditioning confusion. I lay out a lot of the adaptations around this stuff and kind of where it all fits. So I'll only briefly touch on it in this video, just so I can give you more of the meat of the actual conditioning planning for jiu-jitsu. But essentially, you want to plan your training so you're touching very low ends of your aerobic work, if you need it, depending on how much jiu-jitsu you're training, and the very high ends of a lactic power, or sprint intervals with longer rest, you know, call it whatever you want. So a low intensity area, you're doing low intensity steady state cardio, cardiac output, whatever you want to call it. For example, going for a run. 30 to 60 minutes, even up to 90 minutes. I prefer this being done off feet instead of running. So rowing machines, bike, etc. like that just takes the impact away. You can even do it specific to jiu-jitsu. So it could be drilling with a partner, 2 and 2, 1 on 1. Actually, if you throw this on the screen now, I have a graph. I tracked my heart rate during just a technical jiu-jitsu class, and you can see how it kind of just waves in that low intensity zone. So if you're doing a lot of jiu-jitsu, you're probably getting a lot of this already. And even if you're not and you want to do a little more, just partner drilling. On this one, we were just doing 1 and 1 or 2 and 2 of various drills, and you can see you're sitting in that nice little low intensity zone. So having a partner and doing something like that is very helpful. Plus you get to drill the technique on top of your conditioning. So you're just getting more reps in. So you can do that. You can also do like solo shadow wrestling, etc. like that. You can also add long, high intensity interval training into this. It's a little more intense than obviously your low intensity steady state, but it's still going to give you the benefits of having an interval style training. So having that on off, you're still going to maximize stroke volume or fill that left ventricle with blood. So you're still going to see those central adaptations that you would from low intensity steady state. Use this one a little more sparingly, but it's something that you can easily do. So some examples, I've given you an example of the low intensity one. For long, high intensity interval training, it could be something like 2 to 3 sets of anywhere from 2 to 8 minutes. And in that time, it could be anywhere from 80 to 95% max heart rate. If you're using maximal aerobic speed, which is basically taking a 5 or 6 minute row, run, or bike time, and then you're going to divide the distance in meters divided by the time in seconds. That'll give you a number, something like 4 or 4.5 as your meters per second as your maximal aerobic speed. And then you're going to train at 90 to 95% of that. So there's that. And then your alactic power, that's your pure sprint power output stuff. Now, I'm not saying to go run sprints. I highly advise you don't go run sprints because you just increase your risk of injury greatly, especially if you don't run. So this is best done typically on a bike, something that's easily cyclical because it's only 6 to 7 second efforts. So typically I like to see a 2 to 3 second build up and then 6 to 7 seconds maximal sprint intensity. You should be absolutely gone after those 6 or 7 seconds, and then you're going to fully recover. So you're going to do 2 to 3 minutes of rest, which seems like a lot for only 6 seconds of work, but the goal is to be maximally recovered each rep so you can display maximal power outputs every single rep. Do about 5 to 6 reps of that. So that's how you can hit either end of the spectrum. And then obviously everything else in the middle is your jiu-jitsu. As you get prepared, maybe you're preparing closer to a fight, even if you don't compete, you can run the same model because you can do this most of the year. And then for 4 to 6 weeks, you can kind of move a little more towards this middle ground as we get to higher intensities with less rest. Now, how do you fit this within a training week? Here's the framework I like to follow when we're looking at planning your conditioning around your jiu-jitsu. Now, if you're only training jiu-jitsu 2-3 times a week, this doesn't really apply because you've got so much time off. You can just do your conditioning on your off days, or even on the same day, you've got so much time to recover. If you're training more often, 4, 5, maybe 6 times or more a week, then this is more applicable. Now, this isn't the only way to do it. Sometimes, you have work, you have life, you have family. Sometimes you just have to get your conditioning or your extra work done whenever you can. And that's just the best case scenario for you. But this is what I would call this the best case scenario if you had the time and you were able to plan your full training schedule. High and low. This is part of the polarized approach, talked about a lot in the podcast too. High stress activities, low stress activities. Group them together. So I've done this for you here. So your high stress activities in jiu-jitsu, it's your hard rolling, including wrestling and takedowns, your hard positional sparring, for example. I have a class here in Austin that is an hour of just 1 minute on, 15 seconds off of positional work for the entire hour. That's a hard session. Not all positional work is very, very hard. It might be easier positional work. You're just gonna have to play with that as you will. Obviously your sprints, and that includes the entire spectrum that I showed you in the previous graph there. So sprints, obviously your alactic power stuff, that includes your 6-7 a second efforts with maximal rest. It also includes your sprint intervals where you're doing maybe 10 to 30 seconds with less rest. Anything that involves high outputs will fit under here. Then your high conditioning, if you're doing, for example, the hard circuits that people typically put together, lots of stuff, that would fit under here as well. Under the low, just your technical jiu-jitsu training, your normal technical training in class, and then your low intensity conditioning, what I mentioned before, your low intensity steady state, or your long high intensity interval training. And what you want to do is you want to group each of these on its own day. So you have an undulation. So during the week, it might look like this. You might start high and then low, and then high, then low. That's how your week should ideally look. And that gives you time to push hard on one day, recover, and do some easy work on the next day. Hard rolling day one, and then instead of it going down into a low intensity work the next day, it's hard conditioning the next day with hard strength conditioning. Then it's hard again for technical training. Then it's hard again and obviously that just leads to disaster over the long haul. So you want this undulation. Same thing with potentially some of your weeks. If you're deloading or tapering or whatever's happening, maybe if you are more in a organized environment and maybe that week is a lighter technical week, it probably means that your conditioning and your strength conditioning should be also on the lighter side that week. You don't want to bump up something else to take place of that. Otherwise you don't get this undulation within your week. Hard positional work or hard rolling that day, whether you do it before or after training is going to depend on your schedule. Doing your conditioning after training is a better idea than before. But again, you're going to be based on your schedule, what you're going to do. So I'm not going to leave you without an example. So this could be a supplemental conditioning program if you're adding an extra 3 days to your week. Obviously, you can just take out whatever you need if you can't do that. But for example, or as you can see probably from this, you can see the intensity actually reduces or decreases as you're moving throughout your week. Maybe on a Monday, day one, you do your highest intensity effort. It could be Monday or Tuesday. 5 sets, 6 seconds maximal sprint. So 2 to 3 second build up with 2 minutes rest. Ideally, you would do this just straight after your strength training session. It's just the easiest place to put it in terms of timing. You probably don't want to drive to the gym to do 5, 6 second intervals here. Or if you have a garage gym, even better. But after your strength training is typically the easiest place to put that. Your second day in the week, let's just say a Thursday or something, you're gonna do your long high intensity intervals, 3 sets of 4 minutes at 90% of your maximal aerobic speed, or you can do that by heart rate, 80 to 95% of your heart rate max with 2 minutes rest. You can also do this with your specific drilling instead. So you could do, I tend to do a little longer if you're gonna do drilling. So it could be 5 or 6 minutes at that heart rate, maybe partner drilling or solo drills. And then you can finish the week as a recovery style workout. So this might be on a Sunday even, or even a Saturday after a hard morning session, 30 to 45 minutes of just low intensity work. It could be done in a pool, on a bike, on a row. It should be no impact. It should be easy on the body just to help facilitate recovery, but also give you more aerobic gains on top of everything else. So that's something you could run and you can kind of progress the volume as you go through. Then as you get closer to your competition or whatever it is, you have that base set. Now go down in the description, there's a link to the Sweet Sides of Fighting Underground. You can actually run all my grappling programs that has all of this stuff laid out for you. I have the Dominate the Mats that's recently been updated, the 2.0 version, runs similar to this, and then also have the Grappling 365. Almost the entire year is done of programming in there. So you have a whole year of your strength and your conditioning all down in there that you can run within the training app. But please make sure to comment below if this was helpful so I can make more videos like this for you.